Diana. She's our partner at AAA Northeast, and she's just going to kick it off because I know she can do an even better job than I can.
Oh, Miss Lauren. And Joanna for Georgia is here. And we're kind of the team that originally developed the Shifting Gears program back at our offices at AAA Northeast. We live in Rhode Island. So we're at our headquarters office in Providence, but we're both working from home. Next week, we go back to the office for real. So gonna get real. My dog's gonna be sad, but it's all good, right? So yeah, guys, I just thought I would start off by giving you all a little bit of history on the genesis of the program, because I know all of you realize how important this topic is. But before I kick off, is it okay? Would you guys mind just going around and telling me who you are, where you work, where you are most of the time?
We do not mind, but hi, I'm Lauren for Joanna's sake. I am the Northeast Regional Manager based in New York, and I will kick it to Carol and go from there.
Perfect.
Hello, I'm Carol. I am the Regional Manager for Ohio and Kentucky, and one of my favorite partners in Ohio is Kimberly Schwind in Columbus. She's amazing.
She is. She's such a sweet person, too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carol. I see Michelle next in my Brady Bunch grid, but.
Perfect. I'm Michelle, and I am the state coordinator in Arizona.
Oh, I wish I was there.
Yeah.
It's cold. It's cold in New England today.
Not here.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. And then I see Morgan next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan. I am our Director of Prevention and Field Engagement. So I get the lucky opportunity to work with all the people on this call today. And I am located in Michigan.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you, Morgan. Joanna, do you want to go and tell everyone?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Joanna. I'm a public affairs specialist with AAA Northeast. So the co-creator along with Diana of the Shifting Gears program. So that's me.
And Camry.
Hi, my name is Camry. I am the Maryland State Coordinator for Maryland. And hi.
I love your name. That's a beautiful name.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you. And then I see Tracy.
Hi, I am Tracy Lemaire. I am the state coordinator for Louisiana.
Beautiful. All right. I have to get down there soon.
Yes, it's a great place to visit.
Yes. Fun. And then I see Bailey. And it's okay that you have your camera off, Bailey. I don't mind.
There, I'm multitasking, sorry. I will get to turn my camera on soon. I am Bailey Bindle. I live in Nebraska. I work for the national office as our communications manager, and I also have a regional manager position, which is similar to the work of a state coordinator.
Oh, wow. You've got a lot, Bailey.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, Joanna and I do a lot. We do communications, PR, and education. So I feel for you.
I wear many hats.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And then I see Aaron.
Yes, hello. My name is Aaron Medina. I'm the North Carolina State Coordinator. I'm based out of Hickory, so Western North Carolina, but this week I'm facilitating some events in the Triangle, Eastern part of the state. So I'm all over, but excited to take some time to learn from this training. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. So here's the history lesson about shifting gears. So at AAA Northeast, one of the programs that we delivered was a juvenile offender class for driving offenders with the state of Rhode Island. So it was actually requested by the Rhode Island Family Court because there was no juvenile offender program at the time. Some grant money had run out and they had nothing. So we developed a program called TREADS, which stood for Teen Re-Education for Driving Safer. And I was one of 2 lead instructors on that program for about 5 years. And I kind of, if you've ever seen the movie The Breakfast Club, I always called it my breakfast club group because it was like all day on a Saturday, early morning to late afternoon, this like 6.5-hour program. And it felt a little bit like detention, I'm sure, to these young people. But what was really interesting is, you know, and you guys all work with you, so you totally get this. After the first couple of hours, they kind of broke down and just let it all out and were very honest and open about why they were there. I never led with like, tell me about your violation, what judge sent you here. I never led with that. I did have all that background information in a folder, but I wouldn't even open the folder because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to like enter into that program with any bias. So they would eventually just kind of tell me. And one of the modules, of course, within this program was impaired driving. And after the first couple of groups, I realized that they really wanted to talk about marijuana, and they kept kind of repeating the same messages group after group, which was what I'm sure you all hear too. Oh, if I'm drinking with friends or if I see someone drinking, oh, we'll always get a designated driver. We'll plan for that. But marijuana, it just makes me feel relaxed. We were hearing it makes me a better driver. I use it instead of my ADHD medications, all the same stuff you guys hear. So at that point, I asked my boss to order, if I could order some of those Intercorp Fatal Vision kits with the, you know, the Fatal Vision goggles and marijuana goggles. And I dedicated a little bit more time to talking about marijuana with that group. And even then, it kind of almost, I felt, wasn't enough. So that's when God gave me a gift, and then Joanna for Georgia came and she became a full-time staff member. And kind of the first big project that I said, Joanna, we got to work on this project together, was creating a standalone program that just addressed marijuana impaired driving. So we tried to be smart about it. You know, we looked at the real program theory behind it. I had some great meetings just before the development of this program with Harvard's like public health folks. And I recalled them talking about how when, you know, back in the 70s, a lot of NHTSA folks, a lot of traffic safety advocates went and met with the Hollywood Screenwriters Guild to try to get the term designated driver written in to films and sitcoms and just all of the media, you know, the mainstream media that everyone was digesting, and it was super effective. And it really does amaze me that all these decades later, these young people are still saying, oh, I need a designated driver. And it just shows the power of social norming, you know, positive social norming. So I said, all right, you know, we've just got to take that same concept and plug it into marijuana. Knowing that we're all working with a different generation. You know, when I'm old, guys, so, you know, when I was back in high school in the 90s, I was seeing those, this is your brain on drugs PSAs, and I was like, oh, that would be me. You know, I was very fearful. These young people, when you really think about it, I mean, recreational marijuana was being legalized in some states when they were in kindergarten. It was already in use medicinally when they were babies. So, you know, just consuming and reading the headlines and hearing, you know, just the social norming around it has changed so dramatically. So we wanted to root the program in the area of planned behavior. And we knew, because we have the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, that some research was already being done, which was kind of honestly the cornerstone for the Shifting Gears program. So the AAA Foundation started by looking at crash fatalities with those who had tested positive for active THC in the state of Washington, pre-legalization and post-legalization. And the crux of it, the message that we really try to get across is that we're not coming at you guys with personal opinions, and we're not trying to demonize marijuana, because I'm sure you guys hear the same thing, that they get very defensive, especially when like their parents and grandparents are using it. And so we didn't want to cross that line. Our goal was really to very clearly frame this around driving, and strictly around driving. There is one other component in the program that talks about the effects of frequent cannabis use for the young developing teenage brains. So all the prevention folks, I think, will give that a thumbs up. A lot of the health teachers like that. We do have that included in the program. But when it comes to peer-to-peer education, it's kind of like delivered in a style that's not, it's not demonizing the drug in any way. So, that cornerstone of research is what we just try to like lead with and let them know that, this is research. This isn't my personal opinion, that this is, legitimate research that looked at the pre and post. And another study was done, and Joanna, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 3 years out. It was published in 2017. And they said, okay, does that fact still hold that after the law was passed, the proportion of fatally injured drivers testing positive for THC doubled? And in years out, it still held, where those pre and post numbers look very, very different. So we're trying to lead with the research and nothing more than the research. So Joanna and I, it was probably the better part of a year just in kind of working with the design team, getting everything together. And then we ran a pilot in our tiny little state of Rhode Island. It's kind of nice to run pilots when we're a 5-state club, but Rhode Island is very drivable. You're through our whole state in about an hour. So we were able to do some good outreach with schools. I know you guys are from like some big states, so it's a little embarrassing, but yeah, it's so tiny. But the pilot, we did pre and post program surveys also, because we wanted an evidence-based program. Like that was really the goal. We wanted to get this ultimately published, I think. And the pre and post surveys look great. The attitudinal scores were great. Everything was moving in the right direction. So at that point, we kind of knocked on the door of Brown University School of Public Health and said, can you do a peer review? Can you look this over? They had very minor changes. They ultimately endorsed the program, which made us feel good. At that time, the dean of the School of Public Health was a woman named Bess Marcus, who was really, really active about pushing forward marijuana and driving research within the university's scope as well. And then Ashish Jha, who I'm sure a lot of you guys know that name, because he was sort of the pandemic public health spokesperson for COVID. And to be very honest, I've been working with Lauren for a really long time to get this lined up. And what was kind of holding this partnership up was that we needed the checkoff of Brown University School of Public Health. And Ashish Jha was so busy, I think, with everything he was doing. And now he was named by President Biden to be the lead public health person. So busy guy, but we got there.
Thanks, COVID.
So we're in a good place at this point. But the pandemic really did change also the delivery of the program. We got about one solid school year under our belts with this program across our 5-state territory before we all went and started doing everything virtually. So there was, I think, an interesting trade-off, because one of the things that we incorporated into the program was we kept the use of those fatal vision goggles, and we just did some hands-on activities with, throwing balls and stuff like that, just to get the kids, up and active. So we couldn't do that anymore, obviously. But what we did change was we started inviting a drug recognition expert into every single session. That was more successful, and Joanna did a great job with that in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. So we have a couple student leaders that we're going to try to do a webinar with shortly. And there's one particular DRE in Massachusetts that Joanna works with a lot, he connects with the kids. He's fantastic. But that changed. And that actually was the only element within the program, beside being virtual, that really changed throughout the pandemic. But we actually saw even better improvement in our attitudinal scores, which is shocking because, Joanna and I, our past lives, we were teachers, we were educators, and we're like, oh, this isn't going to work as well online. But we were shockingly, really pleasantly surprised that it did. So, the other thing with the pandemic that I think helped a little bit was you guys all know when you're trying to survey students, it can be tough. So at this point, the program has reached about 60,000 students across our 5 states. And just in this last year, we have about 2,200 surveys back. But what was kind of neat is like when you're teaching on Zoom, you can just throw the link to the surveys in the chat and the kids do them in real time. And yeah, like then you have more data, and that made us happy. So so that changed a little bit, but I will show you just from this year alone what the surveys look like after we walk you through the PowerPoint, if that's okay. And at this, did you guys have any questions about development, history, all that kind of stuff before we kick it off? All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen. Now, what you guys, let's see. And the other thing that I want to make sure I'm doing, Miss Lauren, is sharing sound.
Okay,
I'm so used to Teams. I'm so used to Teams that it kills me.
They couldn't just make it all the same. That would be way too simple.
Here's sound. There we go. There we go. All right. Can you guys see that okay? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right. So now we have our SADD logo here.
So I'll just throw this out there too. Diana and I have been working really closely together on this program because SADD recognized that this is something we really need to get into the realm of, and rather than reinventing the wheel, like literally and physically, why not use a program that's already out there that has the data and that is specifically focused on exactly what we have been asking for, marijuana prevention. And that's when Diana and I kind of got together and said, can we just do this? So here's where we are. We now have an actual MOU signed in place that SADD is going to have like exclusive access to be able to use this program throughout the nation with our chapters. Really exciting. This is really unique. And I'm just like so thrilled that this is finally happening. Like you're looking at 8 months of activity here. So
we could not be partnering with a better organization. We have so much respect for everything you guys all do. You're amazing. And even just, I feel like the last 5 years, how you guys have just expanded and blown up it's amazing. So we're really, really excited about it. Ultimately, Joanna and I are just going to kind of switch off and walk you through these, and we will deliver it in the way that we normally deliver it. However, over the last several weeks, we've gone in and added notes into each of these slides where I feel confident that a 16 or 17-year-old high school student could pick this up and walk their peers through it. We wanted to, really make the notes digestible, but Joanna has also laid out kind of a guidebook. So you'll see the thumbnail of each slide with some notes. And so, student leaders can just kind of walk through it that way. But we just didn't want anyone to feel intimidated by the science of it or anything like that. So I have a kind of a Dropbox, and I think the plan, Lauren, right, is everything in this Dropbox, which includes like the guidebook and some just tips and links, and then the PowerPoint presentation will all be available for download through SADD's website.
Yep. So we're going to have it all. We're going to be able to give this out to all of our students, and they're going to physically be able to do this training with their peers. So it doesn't have to be something that we do as adults talking at students. They can do it together as a peer-to-peer group, which has made this even more attractive and exciting for us.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things, it's funny, when Joanna and I first kind of embarked on this, we initially said, all right, we're just going to go in and address the myths about marijuana. and just kind of dispel all the myths, right? And then some public health folks that, you know, we leaned on for advice and that peer review said, nah, you never want to lead and put out misinformation. So we dialed it back. So everything you see is like the correct information, but it might just be worth, you know, asking students to get it all out kind of, you know, before the program starts, make a list about all the myths, and then make sure that the program addresses the reality, you know, behind each one. So I would definitely recommend that. Okay. So Joanna, I'm gonna let you kick it off for us.
Sure. So this really sets the stage, this facts about marijuana impaired driving. Would you mind going to the second slide? Because that's kind of where the nitty gritty takes place. So we do know that based on scientific study and research and green lab testing, all of that, marijuana use impacts a few different things. So it impacts cognition, which is our brain's ability to think and do work, and then attention, so our ability to focus, problem solve, that type of thing. And then risk avoidance, which all of these, we should be picking up a theme, all of these could significantly impact our driving. So risk avoidance is very crucial on the roadways. And then tracking, this term is kind of different, but basically what it means in a driving context is being able to stay straight and centered in a lane when you're driving. So sometimes when we see an impaired driver, they might be weaving, you know, kind of going between lanes or things like that. And then reaction time. So we do know reaction time is impaired by marijuana use. And then lastly, coordination. So your brain's ability to tell your body what to do. Now, from all of that, we can make that statement that marijuana significantly affects routine driving. And at this point, when I teach the program, I typically say, you know, routine driving is driving home, driving to school, driving to work, the things that we'd normally be really comfortable doing and confident doing. They're going to be a lot more difficult and dangerous if someone is impaired by marijuana. So one other thing too, I try to emphasize that during the course of this program, that's what we want to prove. We want to use scientific evidence, studies, research. And then also I typically throw in a few anecdotes there. So I'll note, like, I'll share some of the stories that I've heard, or, you know, if I'm working with law enforcement, I'll echo that they might share some things too. So that's typically how I set the stage.
All right. Then we kind of start at the very beginning and explain. You'd be surprised how many young people don't know what THC is. They think they do, but they really don't. So we define, you know, tetrahydrocannabinol, and, you know, really try to hone in that that is the chemical responsible for the psychological effects. There is a video that you'll see in a bit that explains the endocannabinoid system, but we do try to, you know, hone in and just explain that you know, it acts like the cannabinoid chemicals made naturally by the body. And I found that, you know, in some classes and some groups, they had a hard time with that concept. So here's just one little trick I want to share. I compare it to melatonin. And I know that sounds a little goofy, but I feel like a lot of young people these days struggle with having a hard time falling asleep. And we know the reason for that is because they're looking at their screens late into the night, right? And so I kind of explained that, yeah, you can go to like a pharmacy and buy a bottle of melatonin. And it's a synthetic form of melatonin. It's not the real chemical that's being produced in your brain, but it's going to kind of help make you feel sleepy. So the cannabinoid chemicals in marijuana are like almost like a synthetic version of the cannabinoid chemicals made naturally by your body. But then when you keep introducing this synthetic version, kind of, you know, and you'll see in a minute, kind of messes with the flow of things, with pathways, right? And go ahead, Joanna, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, so we do find it really important to make sure that we emphasize what THC is before we get into the research, because that's really where the research pulls together. So the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety did a study looking at the state of Washington, which was one of the first states in our nation to legalize recreational marijuana. And they wanted to see if there was any impact on traffic safety. So was there any influence on car crashes related to marijuana use? And so what we found is after they legalized recreational marijuana, the proportion of fatally injured drivers who had recently consumed marijuana doubled. And that was in the course of just 1 year. And as Diana, in her explanation of the research before, that was found even after that 1 year period that we saw that research kind of continue on. So with this, I like to break down that statistics. So when we're talking about the proportion of something, or even when we're talking, let's back up to recreational marijuana, there's a lot of students don't know what that is or don't know what that means. And so with recreational marijuana, I say that is when a state says, okay, it's legal for whatever purposes that somebody wants to use it if they are 21 years of age or older. So 21 years of age or older. It's very similar to alcohol where somebody can go and purchase that and use it for whatever reasons they want. But with that in mind, the proportion of fatally injured drivers, that's the segment of drivers who sadly got into a crash related to marijuana, it doubled. And like, it's kind of the proportion, that's the key word there. But in Washington, what they can do is they take a blood test for somebody who sadly passes away due to a car crash. And they try to say, okay, was there any contributing factor? Was impairment part of that? Did they have alcohol in their system? Did they have marijuana in their system? And so the state of Washington found that more drivers than ever before sadly passed away in a car crash related to marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean that tons and tons and tons of more people were passing away on the roadways. It just means that more of those crashes were related to marijuana. So that's how I try to simplify it a little bit. And I think, for those people who got into those crashes, I'm guessing that they didn't know that their crash risk increases by as much as 200% when they recently use marijuana. And the thing is, when we're talking about THC and how marijuana is detected in the body, active THC is present in a blood test, a blood sample. And THC can come in two forms, active or inactive. So active means that it's up in the brain, and that person drove when they were experiencing the high or those impairments caused by marijuana use. Whereas inactive THC, it might show up on something like a hair sample or urine sample, but that inactive is not impairing. Okay, so that's not impairing a person. So that's how with this research, it's very compelling because we know that these people were getting behind the wheel when they were driving under the influence of marijuana. So.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions and confusion about, okay, if I get sent for a drug test and, it shows that I'm positive for marijuana, what if I consumed it 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago? So that's why we really try to emphasize, no, in this research, it was found in their blood. It was detectable in their blood, and we know it was active versus inactive. So we really try to separate that out. And then I'm sure all of you, if you have not already gotten a ton of questions about how long do I have to wait until it's inactive or until I'm not experiencing that high before I drive. Yeah, we do have some AAA Foundation research around that, but we don't include that in this program because it is so dramatically different for different people and for frequent users versus infrequent users. So I'm not even going to share that. There's a link to the foundation in one of the sheets that I gave to Lauren that's being passed along to you guys. But we don't even want to have that number in our heads because we just try to emphasize that message of it's so dramatically different for each person. So quick.
Marijuana affects many of the critical skills needed for safe driving, namely.
I'm just going to try to raise the volume because I know that was a little hard to
balance,
hear.
coordination, and concentration.
I was at my friend's house and we had just smoked a joint. So he went to drive me home, and I look over at him and he looks like really relaxed, almost dazed. Out of nowhere, he starts drifting into oncoming traffic. And I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? Are you trying to kill us? The experience really scared me, and I've never smoked weed since.
A driver's crash risk doubles when they're under the influence of marijuana. That risk only increases when a driver mixes marijuana with alcohol and other drugs. It's not just driving that we're concerned with. Activities like sports can be challenging. In fact, teens under the influence of marijuana can get seriously injured. Simply put, whatever it is you're trying to do, driving, playing a sport, even walking down the street, you're not going to be able to do as well under the influence of marijuana as you would sober. Marijuana.
Okay, so I think that video just opens up a lot of opportunity for conversation. You know, we really try to drive home that point of whatever it is, it's not just driving, it translates into other things. But when it comes to driving, you are, you know, putting other people at risk. It's not just yourself. You're putting everybody else on the road, your passengers, pedestrians, cyclists at risk along with you. So this is the video that I was referring to that talks about the effect of marijuana on the still developing young brain. And as you all, I'm sure know, our brains can continue to develop until about 24 years old-ish, right about there. This is a little bit lengthy, so I apologize in advance. But I think it's a great video, and it explains a lot about that endocannabinoid system. So I'm going to play this for you.
During our teenage years, how we interact with the world changes. We seek out new interests and experiences, take more risks, and spend more time with our friends and less with our family. These behaviours have developed through evolution to make sure we push ourselves so that we learn to become independent from our parents. By putting ourselves in new and challenging situations, different parts of our brain learn to work together, forming brain circuits that can communicate with each other rapidly to help us respond in different ways. Ensuring that our brain is wired in the right way during the teenage years with strong and healthy brain circuits is critical to our future and how we get the most out of life. Three of the most important circuits that are developing during this period are those involved in learning and memory, motivation, and mood. Learning and memory circuits control our ability to receive, store, and recall information. Our motivation circuit is supported by an inbuilt reward system that helps us to decide if something is important and whether we should do something to get it. Our mood is shaped by emotional circuits that interpret how we experience and react to different situations and interactions. Making sure these particular circuits wire in the right way during our teenage years is the brain's own occupational health and safety team, the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a complex and delicate brain system which helps to fine-tune communication within these circuits, ensuring the wiring is assembled correctly, damaged cells are repaired, and the right connections are strengthened for the future. When looking into the effect of cannabis on the brain, scientists found that we naturally produce a brain chemical called anandamide that is similar to cannabis. Concentrations of anandamide are delicately calibrated for it to accomplish its critical role within the endocannabinoid system. This is why, if we add cannabis into the brain, it causes the endocannabinoid system to become flooded with cannabis chemicals. It's a bit like dumping a bucket of salt on your chips instead of a pinch. Or like stadium speakers being plugged into your iPod. Constantly disrupting the endocannabinoid system with cannabis impacts how your brain develops, and in particular, how the mood, motivation, and learning and memory circuits get wired. Short-term memory loss is a common characteristic of long-term heavy cannabis use, because when you use cannabis, less information gets saved as memories. This is why it's harder to learn and remember new information, which can lead to significant drops in school grades. Cannabis can reduce your ability to focus attention, to organise yourself and make decisions, not just when you're using cannabis, but for weeks afterwards. Cannabis use can also lead to loss of motivation. Heavy users can feel detached and disinterested in things they used to like, such as sports, hobbies, and catching up with friends. It can also lead to low self-confidence that in turn affects your mood, making it more difficult to manage everyday stresses, worries, and frustrations, which can result in prolonged low mood, anxiety, and depression. While these effects are commonly experienced by people who use cannabis regularly, new research suggests that these effects are worse and more permanent for people who start using cannabis while their brain is still developing. This is because the endocannabinoid system plays a central role in the development of your neural circuitry during the teenage years. The developing brain has a pretty good blueprint to work off, but our experiences and interactions with the outside world also help to shape these neural circuits that we will rely on as adults. Your teenage years are an adventure that sets you up for life. Enjoy the ride and look after your brain. It's the only one you've got.
So I know that's really long, and that's the reason why in the one pager for resources, you will find that there's a version of that built into an ed puzzle. So it kind of breaks it up and lets students reflect and answer questions kind of at 3 different points throughout the video. But I know it's long, but I love this video because I feel like it opens the doorway for a bigger conversation around mental health. And I think finally we're starting to look more closely at the intersection of mental health and traffic safety and impaired driving. So glory to God for that, right? It's kind of a revelation. So I asked them to reflect back on a couple of things. So anandamide, so again, kind of comparing anandamide as the chemical naturally produced in the brain versus the synthetic, right? And how it's so major key that has to be very carefully regulated. Then I asked them to try to recall the 3 key words that all start with the letter M: mood, memory, and motivation, which have obviously there's a negative long-term effect on those 3 factors if a young person frequently uses cannabis. So we kind of just have a talk about, what it means to have your mood affected long term. And that's where we talk about anxiety and depression and sort of the sad irony that so many young people have shared with us that they started using marijuana in the first place because they felt like they had anxiety issues and they just wanted to feel calmer. Or like I said earlier, they felt like they were having a difficult time focusing or were very hyper and couldn't stay focused in school. So they turned to marijuana over their prescribed medications that they, had been just prescribed by their physicians. So there's all that. Then the memory part, we talk about all the skills and the ability to learn. It's such a gift at this point in their lives as young people. A lot of times I'll end up talking about my own son, where he fascinated me by becoming fluent in 2 additional languages during his high school years. And really, or kids that could just like Joanna, you can see her guitars in the background, can just like pick up an instrument and learn how to play an instrument, just because it's such a great time in life where you just have that ability to absorb so much. And why would you hinder that with marijuana use, And then how motivation, I always say it's like the secret ingredient for life. And I always tell the kids, you'll go back to your 20th high school reunion one day, and it's not going to be probably the valedictorian who did all this amazing stuff. It's just going to be like the C student a lot of the time who has enormous motivation toward their goals. So I just think this video just, it sits at this point in the program to just let them reflect on those things. And Joanna, please add, because I know you always have some great key messages with this video.
Yeah, I like to go talk about motivation and how, it's kind of a stereotype of marijuana users that they get stereotyped as lazy. And I don't think that is the actual case. I think the case is there's a chemical reason for a lack of motivation. And the reason is because Diana talked about that naturally occurring brain chemical. That's like a reward chemical, anandamide. If you do something amazing, if you score a goal for your soccer team, if you get an A on that test, that's a good feeling. Your brain rewards you by producing anandamide. The problem is when somebody with a developing brain starts using marijuana, it does create that similar feeling, but it's not natural. And so the more somebody, does something, it can actually start replacing that THC can start replacing anandamide, or it becomes harder for that to be naturally occurring. So I always like to say, would you bother being good at soccer if it didn't feel good to actually succeed? Would you bother studying if it didn't feel good to get an A? And that, I think, really hits home of your motivation really can be sapped by these things. And we really need that because, if certain things don't feel rewarding to us, we're not going to work at being good at them. And they could be really meaningful things that can help us be successful in life later on. So that's my only addition to that.
Yeah, I always like when you say if you didn't do anything to earn that feeling, that's how like if you're practicing sports or if you're running, you get those health benefits. Or if you're studying really hard, you're storing that in your mind. You're a wiser, more knowledgeable person. But if you still get that great sensation without doing the work, yeah, that's where problems start to come into your life. So I always think this is kind of almost the slide that serves as the cliff notes for that video. It just kind of circles back on a lot of the key points. And you might recognize this young lady. This is wonderful, Joanna. We explain a little bit about executive function and how when it comes to driving, the order of operations, so to speak, executive function is very important because driving is multitasking, right? So you are taking in all that visual information, you're controlling the speed and the direction of the vehicle. That executive function is so critical for driving. And then we try to break down the real meaning when we say psychoactive effect and how that translates into driving as well. I'm just going to jump ahead. All these words pop up here, and we circle back to how executive function, it's this series of brain control processes, and how, or if your organization is thrown off, if your focus is thrown up, goal setting, problem solving, it's more than just driving, right? So Joanna, Joanna, by the way, everybody used to be a driver education teacher with us as well. He used to actually be the brave person that took the kids out in the car. I could never do that job, but I'm going to let her take this slide because she has a great way of explaining this.
Sure. So with this one, I always like to say this picture on the top right-hand corner, that demonstrates a normal average driver. A normal average driver should be able to notice, process, and react to pretty much anything that's going on in the roadways. But we do know if somebody is impaired by marijuana or another drug, or even if they're distracted, their useful field of view or their useful field of vision shrinks. And that doesn't mean that somebody is going blind if they've been using marijuana. What it means is their brain is slowed down and so not able to react or process all of that visual information. And so that can make a huge difference between them noticing the dog that's about to run out in front of the car and missing that. And that can lead to, a dangerous or sad situation. So it just takes longer for the brain to translate information into action. And sometimes I like to point out too, part of this, a lot of students will say, they might be better drivers when they're driving under the influence of marijuana because they're so relaxed. And I typically point out we don't want to be so relaxed where we're not able to react in a timely fashion to something on the roadways. We're moving at really fast speeds, faster than Usain Bolt. But we need to be able to respond quickly because things can change in an instant. And so we need our reaction time to be really quick.
Right. And we do have research. There's been a lot of research done in driving simulators that shows that it actually, because your brain is working so hard, right? Your peripheral vision is literally affected. So impaired drivers under the effects of cannabis will get that tunnel vision. And that's problematic. That's actually what causes drivers to drive more slowly sometimes, or sometimes they are speeding, but it's tougher to regulate speed when you're impaired by cannabis, because if you think about it, your peripheral vision detecting motion, that's what gives your brain the inclination of how fast your body is moving, how fast you're traveling, and it really shuts down that process. In speed regulation is a huge issue. So I just like this visual. I know the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety and the National Safety Council have similar images like this, where they actually put like eye tracking software on drivers to see where their field of view or how limited it was. And they've done this research both with actual distracted driving research too, and that had that similar effect. But it's just, gives them a good idea of what's actually happening. And then you'll probably recognize this video. This is the NHTSA, If You Feel Different, You Drive Different video. But the reason why we placed that slide prior to this one about the shrinking of peripheral vision is you actually see it played out in this video. So here we go.
Jay! I'm sorry.
If you feel different, you drive different.
So, we try to reflect on it with students and say, okay, he did not see that pedestrian walk out until she was right in front of his car. And he might have not even reacted fast enough had his passenger not like, Jay, tried to, alert him. But that simulates kind of what happens in real life, where like without that peripheral vision, he absolutely did not see her coming and step out into the street. And this is where Joanna and I really have fun with young people, and we get them to kind of bring up their moral compass a little bit. And I think we typically start the conversation after this video by asking, like, is this guy a criminal? And so
I typically start with like a bad person. Just start with like a bad person, because pretty much every student is going to be like, no.
Look at his face. He's so cute. He feels bad. He's remorseful, And that's initially the way they react. And then we ask, okay, well, is he a criminal? And they have a hard time discerning that because he didn't hit her. And we try to bring them back to his behavior, his choice to get behind the wheel impaired isn't different, right? So some people, if he didn't have his buddy in the car, he probably would have hit her. Then is he a criminal? And it takes a while for them to circle around and understand, okay, we have laws that say you cannot operate a vehicle in all 50 states, right? If you are impaired, that's criminal behavior. We have per se laws in some places. Of course, the laws are going to be different in all of your states. Where we live in Rhode Island, there is not a per se law. Any trace amount of drugs, OUI, you're guilty. But that's definitely not the case everywhere. But we do try to say, no, not a bad guy. His intention wasn't to like set out and go hit somebody, kill somebody, injure somebody, but his behavior is criminal behavior. Joanna, do you want to add anything else?
Sure. I like to, again, focus on that moral compass and just say, this shows us that good people, because we said he wasn't a bad person. Typically, most students will agree with you on that one. So good people can make bad decisions that sometimes lead to really bad consequences. So if there was a police officer around, well, he probably would have gotten pulled over if that police officer had witnessed that. Or if he had hit her, terrible consequences for that. And so I just think it's a really good discussion to say, okay, but what could maybe he have done differently? What could his friends have done differently to make it a safe choice, or to, do things around? So it sometimes can lead to actually really like kind of positive and say, okay, well, what could be done differently? So it just depends on like how the conversation goes. But yeah, I really like pointing that and having that discussion with students, because it is a way where they can kind of understand, oh, there are reasons why we have these laws. There are reasons why this might be bad. So yeah.
And to Joanna's point, this is where we start to pull them back to that theory of planned behavior too, by asking, what she just said, what should he have done differently? And honestly, everyone who has one of these, right, it eliminates the excuses. Completely eliminates the excuses. But you are all skilled practitioners in having this part of the conversation, I realize. So try to bring them back to driving and circle back on what is affected by cannabis use, right? So estimation of time and distance. We talk about divided attention, driving as a divided attention task. Slowing down, the brain's ability to process sensory information, and the delay in reaction time. And these, you will not get many arguments, right? And I love when, Joanna, when you say, does anyone actually use marijuana to feel the same, to feel the way they did sober? Or do people use marijuana to have it, to feel different, to feel more relaxed, to feel less anxiety? But that has a consequence, which is the delay in reaction time, the delay in processing information, the delays that come with divided attention. So, all right. This is where we try to explain what DREs do, and I'll let Joanna take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I might point out some of these physical symptoms, and I typically say, these are pretty easily observable physical effects that I could notice in another person. I was like, you guys can totally notice this when somebody, looks like this. And then I bring it to law enforcement. Law enforcement can easily identify these physical symptoms or physical effects in a person. So that's really where I take this. Sometimes I'll point out too, like, I'm concerned about drowsiness, for driving, or, we don't want somebody to be driving whose altered time and space perception is messed up, that's not great for driving. So sometimes I'll point that out too, but it really does kind of quickly lead into that conversation of law enforcement can identify these physical effects. If I can, they certainly can.
Tells the myth too, where, so many young people will say, police can't tell if I'm high. They can tell if I'm drunk because there's a breathalyzer for that, but they can't tell if I'm high. And that's where we have to, really explain. I mean, even someone who's not a drug recognition expert, who has A-RIDE training, we can typically point it out. So we try to explain the difference between, in sort of the whole process, what the process would look like. You do something on the roadway that indicates you're impaired. And, and this is where a lot of the guest speakers who are police officers or DREs will chime in and say, sometimes you don't know if that driver is texting, posting, TikTok videos of themselves, what they're doing, or if they are impaired, but you follow them for long enough and it looks really similar. And we kind of walk through the steps of, okay, they have a reason to suspect impairment. You get pulled over, they have a short conversation with you. They want to see how articulate you are, how you're responding. If they have reason to suspect, hey, it's not just, somebody distracted by their phone or something else in the vehicle, there's something going on with this person, then they move to the SFST. If you don't, respond very well with the SFST, that's where the breathalyzer would come in. if the breathalyzer shows, yeah. I mean, and sometimes this is where it's getting harder and harder by the year, guys, because of the polysubstance use, right? So often the person is high and drunk, but they would certainly call in a drug recognition expert for further assessment. And, you know, we try to kind of explain that what that 12-step process looks like that a DRE walks them through. And I can't tell you enough how great it has been having a live DRE in our sessions. So I'm sure you guys have tons of contacts. It's, you know, it's not necessary, but just the anecdotes that they can share, the real world experiences have, I think, made a big impression. And they're not shy about asking questions, which is great.
The drug recognition experts conduct extensive follow-up evaluations, which is a 12-step standardized and systematic evaluation in order to objectively assess the type of drug impairment that's involved in that arrest, to identify what drug category the individual may be under. Through scientific study, it's clearly been shown that the cannabis category shows increased pulse rate, increased blood pressure, and dilated pupils. And those are some of the factors that a drug recognition expert is looking for.
So we use that video of Don. He's also a AAA employee part-time when we don't have a live DRE in the room or on camera with us. But a fun fact for Lauren, that gentleman tests the Yankees for drugs every year too. He has kind of an interesting job. And then we just kind of explain about, you know, drug categories, because the DREs mentioned that they are trained to identify the different drug categories, and that marijuana falls under 3 specific drug categories: it's a depressant, a stimulant, and a hallucinogen, and how that breaks down when it comes to an evaluation, and then what a hallucinogen does to the driver, right? That the reason why they're not able to assess a roadway the same way they would if they're sober is because, you know, their time and space and distance is all thrown off because it's a hallucinogen.
Yeah, at this point too, you might, you can mention that there are different types of marijuana that are bred to have these differing, you know, effects. So, you know, and that can make it very tricky in a sense of, you know, when a student might say, well, like how high is too high? Well, we're not 100% sure because it is a very complicated substance. We just kind of have to say, if you're impaired, don't drive. So this can kind of lead into that conversation as well.
I remember a DRE when I was first getting to understand marijuana a little better. He said, this is how I want you to remember it. Sativa is going to cause more of that stimulant effect, right? So they both start with S, sativa, stimulant. Indica is going to make them feel more of like a stoner feeling, you know, bring it down. Or I'm sorry, an indica is going to be more of that. And he equated it to indica is like into couch. You can't get off the couch because you're so stoned. So indica, into couch, sativa, stimulant. Does that make sense? That's how I did it. Anyway. So then, you know, we always get questions about the tests, right? About the breathalyzer, about, you know, are there tests that actually test for THC? Why people have, you know, different periods of time where they're still impaired, and we, you know, try to explain that THC concentrates itself in the fatty tissues of the body. It's not evenly distributed, so elimination rates are all over the place. It's very mathematical how your body will eliminate alcohol. You can pin it to, you know, what size the person is and how long it's going to take, and we've got science behind that, where it's much more complicated with THC. Go ahead, Joanna. I can tell you have more.
Yeah, I think with this one, pointing out those differences of alcohol is circulated in the blood. So that means we can mathematically calculate how long it takes to get out of our bodies. So that's really unique. And sometimes I'll bring up and start asking, you know, what is the legal limit for what is the legal limit for alcohol in a person's system if they're driving? And hopefully students are able to identify that it's 0.08. Now, I will even go further and say, okay, but did you know it's actually 0.02 for somebody who is younger than 21 or older? So that's not much alcohol. So it just might be an opportunity to mention that. And then just in comparison to THC, THC is, stored in the fatty tissues. So the thing is, everybody's body is different and it's going to process THC at a different rate. And that's what makes it tricky. That's why we can't treat it exactly like alcohol. I could have 0.5 nanograms of THC in my system, and Diana could have 0.5 nanograms in her system, and we could be at wildly different levels of impairment. It's really weird. So
I would probably be drooling on myself.
Yeah, so it's really, really weird in that sense. We can't really put that number limit behind it right now.
Right. Then we also talk about synergism, and there's so many, like the CDC reported that before the pandemic, almost 30% of teenagers were taking a daily prescription medication. I think it was like 28.7% before the pandemic. And we know the mental health crisis that, is coming out of the pandemic. I'm sure it's probably, the next time the CDC publishes data on this, it will be higher. But we so often just talk about marijuana and alcohol. We try to also get them thinking about, are you on any prescription? Are you on anti-anxiety medications or ADHD medications or anything like that? That is all, when we talk about synergism, we have to account for that as well. And, we've been in close contact with a lot of toxicologists throughout the progression of this program, and more every year. I'm sure you guys know where to go for your state data, but that polysubstance use is just an increasing problem. NHTSA had done some research in 2020, kind of mid-pandemic. It various, I think it's either 5 or 6 trauma centers across the country. The one closest to us was in Worcester, Massachusetts, and it showed that like 56% of drivers coming in from a crash tested positive for at least one drug. That's like unbelievably overwhelming. So Lauren, if you'd like, I can actually add some of like the research papers into the Dropbox too, just for everybody that wants to look back at that stuff.
Yeah, I think more information the better. Some of us are really avid readers. So yeah, bring it on.
Awesome. Okay. I know y'all like public health people too, so you guys are used to reading a lot, reading through a lot of research. So yeah, so we just try to make sure with such, when I was growing up, it was so rare to find that one of my friends, one of my peers was on a daily prescription medication. It's very common these days. So again, I like when the DRE can share anecdotal, like real world stories when it comes to alcohol versus marijuana impaired driving, because as you can see in these two charts, it doesn't look very different. And Joanna, Trooper Pollard always has good anecdotes for this.
He does. And I just try to say neither one of these drivers is a safe driver. Like they're both very dangerous drivers. So it doesn't matter what the substance is. If you feel different, you're going to drive different.
Impaired is impaired. We also talk about a little bit about the stigma and how, I think it's important for them to understand a little bit about social norming and a little bit about how, they have grown up in a generation where drug use has been a little bit more normalized. I still think that just due to the fact that so many are reliant on daily prescription medication, it's not as scary, to them to consume something else on top of that. And then we do talk about implied consent. I know
one aspect with that other slide too, and somebody actually threw this in the chat. They've heard students say that they're better drivers when they're high This is one of those things. And because you're getting towards the end of the program, it's great to highlight, like, that's just not true. Every single person, if they are impaired by marijuana, they are a worse driver. We know that. So just, I always like to say, maybe share with a friend or family member, hey, you can't do this and drive, because that could be dangerous for you and a lot of other people. So that stigma aspect too, just, making sure that they understand that it really is dangerous. And that even though they might hear people say that, just know that they have the facts, they have the science, they know that not to be true.
Yeah, and where I've seen personally from getting feedback from students that it gets a little gray is when people have medicinal marijuana cards and they feel that because it's prescribed, they can go about their daily lives, functions, driving included, with marijuana in their system. So it's definitely a sticky point. In some of your states, I know this is a huge, huge issue in my state. We try to emphasize implied consent and how when we're using a public roadway, we have to look out for one another, right? No harm done to anyone else. And they are obligated by law to submit to sobriety testing. And it's become a huge problem here that people will refuse breathalyzer tests and they'll just take the license suspension so they don't have harsher implications. So we try to, I think what we're trying to do is educate that this is like everyone's responsibility, right? To have safe roads for everyone has to do their part, but there is a law in place. And in many states, by not submitting to a chemical test, the laws are much stricter. I wish they were here. We're trying to advocate for that now. But I just think it's important to circle back on, and I'm sorry that my dog is crying. I don't know why.
One other point with that one too, and I know we'll get into decision making, but I think it's always a good idea to say how they can be the ones to change this. That's a great transition into, okay, well, what can be done? They can be the ones, their choices, just like one person's bad choice can have devastating consequences. One person's safe decision can actually protect so many different people because everybody uses the roads, everybody. So sometimes I'll try to point out, your grandparents are driving on the road, going to get groceries. First responders are out there, your friends, your family members, everybody at some point is going on in a car or in a bus. And so if we drive safe, we keep all of those people safe too.
And the positive social norming messaging is so effective here where, like Joanna said, they have the power to change things. I often remind them that they're the first generation of drivers to get licensed in this new world where marijuana is being legalized and decriminalized. And it's their job to kind of correct the myths and the misconceptions, and just like alcohol, make that plan ahead to be the sober driver, designated driver. I think we have to remind ourselves, and I know this is hard in the prevention world sometimes, that we sound like the crazy prohibitionists, right? If we have this mindset stuck that like we have to tell them never to try marijuana, because that's a confusing message in a world where it's legal. It would be like someone telling us at 17 or 18 years old, you're never ever going to use alcohol in your whole life. It's almost like we have to operate under the presumption, not that they're going to use it illegally, but that after the age of 21, if it's legal in their state, and in what 18 states it already is, that they're going to come up on a situation where they have to think ahead and make that plan B. So just try to equate this here to the what they see every single time they get in any vehicle, right? The park, reverse, neutral, and drive stands for plan ahead, review the plan when it's time to roll, never allow impaired driving, and who's the designated driver if that's needed. Is it, not mud and snow, but is it me or is it someone else? So hopefully, you know, every time they kind of get in the car, they'll think back to this. And I never think it hurts. I always try to say, have that plan, like put it in your phone, write it down, have the emergency contacts there. So, you know, under that theory of planned behavior, so you are ready when you need, whether it's in high school, whether it's in college, whether it's, you know, the first happy hour that they're going to with their professional friends when they're working someday. You know, you never know when you're going to need it, but always have the plan. So there's Ms.
Thank you for
Joanna.
participating in this program on marijuana and driving.
There's some resources for all of my fellow research nerd friends. Love you guys. I'm just gonna bring up, let's just open for questions, and I'm gonna just try to bring up the survey stuff for you while you're asking questions. If anyone has. Okay.
Well, it's not really much of a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. New laptop, still working, how to figure it out. It's not much of a question, it's just more of a statement of I'm happy that this program exists because, you know, most people are definitely like, oh, well, marijuana doesn't affect things like, but that's like mostly when you're older and you guys are targeting, you know, the youth that are more susceptible to smoke out of, you know, experimentation. And you actually went into detail about what strains of like marijuana sativa and things like that do to you. And usually when I'm in like conversations about marijuana, they never go that in detail. And it's actually significantly important to, you know, what someone is smoking and how frequently. And when you talked about the medication, that's humongous. My friend, she is on ADHD medication and told me that if she was to smoke and take her medication at the same day, she would have nothing but panic attacks.
Oh, wow.
And that
So
sounds terrifying.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, I've always been really sensitive to those kids too. I mean, I so many, I think, shared with us through the years about medications that they were taking, but my own son, he's a sophomore in college right now, but he has been taking ADHD medication for years. And let me tell you, as a traffic safety advocate, he was a tough cookie in terms of like getting him to drive. And I put him through so many driving lessons and he still had like 3 crashes, none too serious, thank God, but you know, still. So it's something that's always top of mind for me of like, mixing things. And for so many kids, I mean, I think he started taking medication when he was like 12. So it's so normal for them.
Yeah.
And mixing other things in is so dangerous.
And in the spirit of being fully transparent, I was just recently diagnosed with ADHD. So I just started taking medication and I don't even want to drive because I'm just starting out taking the medication. So I'm just very much like, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah, you want to see how your body's going to react first. You need it to get into your system. I know we've done research around that too. And it's like, there's such an increase within like the first month or so when you start taking a medication, your crash risk goes way up.
Right.
You know, your body's just getting used to it. So.
But altogether, this is an amazing presentation and I love it. And that's it.
So much. It's going to be even more amazing when you're delivering it. Trust me.
Better believe it's going to be so much fun.
Oh, thank you. Aaron, I see your hand too.
Yes, thank you. And I also want to kind of echo what Camry was saying. I really appreciate the approach that you all are taking into this, the kind of like, you know, this isn't about like judgment. Sorry, you might hear my son in the background.
Oh, that's fine.
It's about just presenting the science and the statistics. I'm curious if whether it is, this may just be a more North Carolina regional issue, but in this presentation to students, if the conversation or Delta 8 or Delta 9 strains come up, because where I live, a lot of that is still very much legal. It can be bought over the counter at various vape shops, sometimes without even having to be 21. People can be 18 years old and get some.
Oh, wow. So, you know what? I think when we were creating this, Joanna and I, what we were hearing from our region, and the reason why we honestly, Aaron, got in the door of a lot of high schools initially is because vaping THC was such a huge problem, right? And I don't think all of the educators and administrators were like as concerned about the driving component as they were, I don't want the vaping going on in my bathrooms down the hall here in the school, right? We haven't specifically gotten a ton of questions though about, at least I haven't, maybe Joanna can speak to it better, but like the Delta 9 and yeah.
No, we don't get a lot of questions regarding that. You know, it's very interesting because it really depends student to student, but I would say the majority of them, you know, they kind of put marijuana in this big box. And so it kind of depends where you are. So some students will share more, like they have a pretty decent understanding of marijuana, maybe even more so than me, but then some of them really don't. So I haven't gotten any nitty-gritty questions like that, but that would definitely be something you know, that we'll do some more research on, and feel free to, as you do your research, feel free to share with me and Diana. We'd love to hear more about, you know, what you hear back from about that.
Yeah, I think it's just one of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this is where I think we tend to lean a little bit more on law enforcement too, when we have them in as guests, because they know what's going on. Like I just presented, at the Lifesavers conference a couple of weeks back. And in my presentation, there were so many comments from members of law enforcement. Like he was a Chicago police officer, was just talking about how all the marijuana coming in was laced with fentanyl, and they were getting all these overdose deaths. And it was just like a complete tragic nightmare going on in that city at the time. And this is 2 weeks ago, so now currently. But I feel like they respond much better and are much more proactive about what they're seeing in the real world.
No, and I think you're exactly right in that it's getting harder and harder to keep up with all the different like variants and ways that youth are not only getting access to these drugs, but also the kinds of drugs and what's in them, you know, whether that is over the counter or not. I'm sorry, he's very upset. He just really hates impaired driving. Exactly.
A tough topic.
And so maybe it's, you know, just part of facilitating these workshops. And to be honest, it can be hard to keep up with a lot of these different, you know, drugs. So but to y'all's point, the students that I talk to when I ask about marijuana in schools and amongst their peers and their friends, they all say that some mention that it takes place in the bathroom. The majority of it takes place in people's cars. And so they, whether it's vape or traditional marijuana or edibles, what do they do as soon as they're finished, you know, using that drug in their car? They drive away. And so I'm really glad that y'all have constructed a presentation to address this. I apologize if you all already mentioned this, but do you have like an ideal number of students that you like to present this presentation to?
I love that you asked that. I like one classroom at a time. I mean, we probably would have doubled that 60,000 number if we did it as an assembly, but we don't. We purposely keep it into like small groups. We designed it originally to be used in health classes because we want that two-way conversation happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my, I actually did teach this as like a freshman assembly, like when we first started the program. It was more of the administration kind of made that decision, and it works so much better in a classroom because more students are able to participate. And, you know, I think that's also the way that you have productive discussion on that topic. Like I always try to emphasize with students, it's okay if you disagree with something in this presentation, but I just appreciate, you know, any honesty, because you know, if we're being honest about our thoughts and opinions, we can talk about it. So I think that smaller classroom just enables students to open up a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I also did it at like a prevention conference, but we broke it out into small groups. That was back in the fall, and we purposely just had like kids cycle through in about groups of 20. And they have so much to say. It does, it blows me away sometimes. If I don't see any other hands, I might be missing. I just wanted to see if we don't have any other questions, if I can just share this with you guys real quick so you have an idea of what the surveys look like. So again, this is just for this school year, representing about 2,200 students. You can see that we visit schools in most of the 10th and 11th grade classes, which I think hits the mark. If I could recommend it for a certain specific age group, I would definitely say 10th grade, because I think we need to get them before they get their driver's license, you know. But if it's like a SADD group that's mixed 9th to 12th, I think that's outstanding too. Go ahead, Aaron. Oh, I thought it was this hand. It's the other hand. Sorry. For just some reason, I just thought I would share. The program's gone really well, at least in terms of survey responses in New York. So Lauren, that's your peeps. Rhode Island, we're doing okay. New Jersey, we're doing okay. Massachusetts, Connecticut, I guess they just don't like our surveys in Connecticut. I don't know what's going on there. So this represents, God, there's just been, obviously, it's been so hard to get back into classrooms. I think this spring, like moving into prom season, you guys know how it works, that they'll have us in pre-prom. They like us at this time of the year. So I'm hoping that in my, the live presentations pick up, but we've been doing most of them virtually and online for the last year, actually for the last 2 years. But pre-program, when we asked how does marijuana affect a driver's performance, you can see that the scores weren't bad, right? To begin with, like 88, like I'll round up, 89%, even pre-program said that it significantly affects driver's performance. But I'm sorry, this was the pre, this was the post. I mislabeled that. I was trying to scratch it together right before this meeting. So 58% said significantly, right, to begin with, and then that jumped up, so you can see the attitudinal change, right? Then when we ask about affecting a person's reaction time, they seem to get it. Post-program, they really do. You can see the difference there. Does marijuana use impact a driver's ability to think quickly or focus? So that wasn't bad to begin with, 91% before, 94, I'll round up to 95% after. Do you feel that the drug, that it negatively impacts mental processing, executive functioning? 88% said yes to begin with, it jumped up to about 94. We ask about what would your first plan be for alternate transportation if your driver was impaired. Overwhelmingly, I mean, they don't seem to shy away from appointing themselves as a designated driver, which I like, but overwhelmingly it was like get a call from a sober driver. And then this, I think, this gives me hope and joy, you guys, right? So how many times have you used marijuana during your lifetime? Almost 84% said 0. So, I mean, that's across the 5 states, and we're getting them, remember, 10th, 11th grade for the most part. By 12th grade, I'm not sure this would hold true, right? But I think this is very important. How old were you when you first tried marijuana? Over 55%, it was at 15 or 16, and a pretty high percentage, almost 29, said 13 or 14. So we do, like, that's why I'm saying 10th grade, I think we've got to hit them there if possible. During the past 30 days, how many times have you used marijuana? So this question, let me just explain, only appears if they selected yes, that they had tried. So we don't ask everybody this question, but if they say, yeah, I did, we ask about, frequency of use in the last 30 days. And then during the past 30 days, how many times did you drive after using? So thankfully the majority said 0 or that they had not driven. But I just think the surveys show how important it is to get to them early. I mean, we've actually had a lot of requests to bring this program to middle schools. And I don't know, and Lauren's nodding, so I'm sure you guys hear a lot about that too. I don't think we can start early enough, you know?
I think that's kind of the point too. You know, what you'll see in this program is a lot of what SADD does as well. We don't use that don't language, don't do marijuana, don't do that. We're not harping on that issue. So it kind of hits them in a different space, that we're not those people that are coming in, tell them not, you know, we're not the fun suckers, but we're telling you not to drive. We're telling you not to drive. So in 10th grade, I think it's perfect. 11th grade too, when they're just getting that license and they're realizing, all right, I kind of have to make a choice. Like, do I want to do this or do I want to drive my car?
Exactly. I love that. Yeah.
And we can couple a lot of different things. You know, we can bring in those other fun-sucking folk that we love so much. You know, the prevention people that want to talk all about brain development and how this, you know, bring them in. That's a good time for partnerships. I can see a lot of different ways this can go for SADD to keep like those partnerships rolling with law enforcement prevention agencies. But I think it puts us in a very good space from the traffic safety perspective to be able to use this with our students. And because it's coming from the student lens, it's going to be even more effective, in my opinion, because again, it's not the adults preaching at them. It's students saying, you know, we're making this conscious choice not to drive.
Right.
Sorry,
So
Carol.
I mean, within all the resources that we're kind of handing over, you'll have that exact PowerPoint that we showed you today. You'll have the guidebook with all the notes that you can pass along to students and advisors and coalitions everywhere. There is a folder of like social ties where that could be handed over to students too if they wanted to like post about the program. It kind of points out some of the highlights, I think, from the combined surveys that we've been collecting since 2018. So there's some social tiles. Again, there's like a one sheet that just has some good links to other resources, like the SAMHSA app and stuff like that, the AAA Foundation research link, you know, all the usable kind of stuff that I think you guys will actually want to utilize. So thank you.
Carol.
So will we still be using the same pre and post surveys and gathering data as we spread this all out? Or are you going to be setting up something separate that allows us to kind of gather from all over the country and have it in some separate
Such a good
data?
question. So I would have loved to just hand over our survey and have like this national perspective. Unfortunately, we have this horrible contract with Qualtrics that every survey we get back, every response costs us $1.80. So what I'll do is share the survey with you all, Lauren, and it can be replicated. And ultimately, what we could do is bring all the data together, you know, if we're using the same items.
I'm not above like borrowing the questions and definitely putting them in a Google form, and we all use that as a national group. So then we can collaborate data on our side and hand that over to AAA so we can have even bigger data and not have to pay $1.80 per answer, which is ridiculous.
Crazy. It's limited us from a lot of the research that we want to do. We need to find a better contract. But Carol, I love the way your brain works because we love data. We love measurement too, Joanna and I. So no, thank you. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah,
I'm a data geek. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, I love data. But I do also have another comment. I find it interesting when I go into the health classes and talk about safe driving as a whole. I do an activity where I read out different things and I have them pull a red chip or a white chip based on whether they engage in the safe behavior or the not safe behavior. So for example, I ask, you know, do you always wear your seatbelt in the front seat? If so, take a white chip. If no, take a red chip. And I do several of those the last one I ask is, have you ever driven or ridden in a car with somebody who just smoked marijuana? And although I don't have the data, I will tell you, I see lots of red chips going into bags. Lots and lots and lots of red chips. So I'm just curious about your data that, like, there's
the honesty of our students.
Heroes that are not smoking marijuana. When I do this thing, I see a whole lot more red chips.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wonder how honest they're being. I mean, and we try, and Joanna can attest to this, we tell them all this is anonymous. We have no way of knowing who you are. There are no identifiers on this data. Like, we're not even able to do that. They're minors, you know, so we wouldn't even go there. But to Erin's point too, I hear that verbally. Like, if you ask them, what percentage of your student body or your peers do you think are using marijuana? They'll say, oh, like 95%. We're not seeing that reflected in the data though. So it's really interesting. But again, going back to what Erin said, it's in the cars and the kids will tell us that. I mean, because we span, in many of your states have already legalized as well. You know, I remember one student telling me, oh, my brother works at a dispensary, it was in Massachusetts, and he watches people all day get in the car with the bag, use the edibles or whatever, and he'll count how many crashes actually happen in the parking lot with them trying to leave the parking lot. He said one day it was like 4 crashes, like the day that this particular dispensary opened, there were 4 crashes in the parking lot. So where it's happening is important.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way for us to also collaborate with like SROs and the school districts, the admin right there, to say, you know, we're going to bring in this program, we're going to do some testing, we're going to get some data, and then maybe in a couple of weeks, we're going to have, you know, law enforcement sit at the edge of the property, and, you know, maybe that'll help reinforce things. And then down the road, we do X, Y, and Z. So you can almost put a school safety plan in place or start working with them on a school safety plan by implementing this. There's so many ways we can go with this, which is why we really, really wanted it.
I know, I love those policies where they have to go to like a safe driving kind of seminar before they get the permit. They're thicker to park at, you know, park there at the school. Love that idea.
Or even having the kids push into the driver's education classes sponsored by the schools if they have it.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. This is why partnering with you guys makes all the difference. You know, you're the boots on the ground. You see what works in because what works in one community doesn't work in another community. So
yeah. So good news is we're going to be rolling this out like sort of across the whole nation at this point. If you want to take it and go, like go by all means. But Diana and I think Joanna too are going to be at a national conference talking about this as well in Florida. So it's going to go even bigger. And then you're also going to see on 420, we're going to be fortuitously releasing a StreamYard, kind of announcing this to everybody in our partnership. So hopefully this really takes off. And of course, Diana, Joanna, if you need anything from us or any sort of anything like pops into your brain, you're like, oh, this would be good information to have, let us know. Like, we're happy to do the grunt work and get any of the data while we're doing things.
Thank you so much. We're so excited. Yeah, thanks.
Anyone have any more questions while we're here? I know
it's a long end to all of your days. I'm so sorry.
No, I was going to say no questions, but thank you so much. I'm so excited for all of this.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I mean, you guys are really the professionals. So
yeah, thank you. We appreciate what you do so much. So please know that.
Awesome. Well, then enjoy the rest of your evening. Sorry, we took 6 extra minutes of your time. This will also be available once it's done downloading and doing whatever it does. So I'll make sure to get this in a mutual place, and I'll get you all the resources too, so you can look back on this and develop how you're going to present it. And if you have any questions, Diana and Joanna are really easy to get at. Yep, there it is, right in the chat. They answer very quickly.
We try. We definitely try. So those are our 2 emails. Oh, you already did that. Okay, there we go. 2 email addresses. Let us know whatever you need.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Take care.
And we will talk. Where'd she go? She left. Bye.